Well, thank you everyone for coming and joining us for a conversation around the theme of creation care and hospitality. The way we're going to do this is that you can continue to eat your soup. In fact, if you would like a little bit more, I encourage you to go and get it now. And then as you continue to eat, we will start our official conversation, and it will be a conversation. So please go ahead and get some soup. There will be a wine reception with lots of nibbles. We don't want you to leave hungry when we're talking about hospitality. Where I come from in Germany, that would not be a good thing. So we will spread a table after the conversation that I will have with Peter Harris and Joe Swinney around the theme of creation care and hospitality. And the way we're going to open this is we're going to show you a video, and it's the video that tells the story of how this book, A Place at the Table, came to be. It is co-authored by Miranda Harris, who died in a tragic car accident 3 years ago, and her daughter Joe Swinney, who's with us today. And the film will sort of introduce the evening for us. It will tell a story that's actually quite hard to tell. And we at St. Stephen's now know what that's like, unfortunately. But life is full of those really hard and tragic stories, but somehow God works through those dark moments in our communities. And that is a very wonderful and gracious thing. So I welcome you all officially to this evening at St. Stephen's. I'm very, very grateful to St. Stephen's, and where is Becky? She is right here, for being willing to host this event here. Creation care is one of the pillars of our church. We as a church are really committed to creation care, so I thought this would be a good place to have this conversation. So we're going to show a little video, and after that I will call Peter and Joe and join me here, and then we will have a conversation together about the theme of creation care and hospitality, and then of course also about this very, very beautiful book that I just got to read in the last couple of days and was very moved by. So if Sheila is ready to show the film, we are going to start with that. Well, while we are figuring out sound, maybe I can say a few words about the organization that Peter Harris and his wife Miranda founded, which started off when Peter got ordained in England and didn't become a priest in the Anglican Church, but was sent off to Portugal to start the first Rocha Center. And Peter is an ornithologist, so it was about a center where they would try to protect bird habitat and develop an educational center to help educate people about creation care and foster community. And they did that in Portugal for many years. And after they had established the center and then handed it over, they actually took a sabbatical, and this is where I met them. I was in graduate school in Vancouver, and Peter and Miranda with the children came on a sabbatical to teach a couple classes, but also be on a sabbatical, and a lot of us got to know them and their vision and were really inspired by their work. And some of my friends then joined Rocha and started a center in Canada. And so we have been, I have followed Rocha around for decades now. So after that, they went to France to start a new center there. And then over time, many more centers popped up around the globe, and it's now a worldwide movement. All of them are Christians who are dedicated to creation care in various forms. It started off with ornithology and creating and protecting bird habitat, and now there are many facets to this ministry. Okay, so I'm not sure, we might have to just sort of keep on with our conversation and see whether we can sort of find the problem. So when I heard that Peter and Joe were going to be on a book tour, I said, why don't you come and stop here in Birmingham? Because there's actually quite a community here, including, of course, St. Stephen's. Is the sound back on? We don't know. Might try. Anyhow, so we're still struggling with the sound. So I asked him, would you please come and join us here in Birmingham, because there are so many communities here that really care for creation. And so the reason that Joe, and maybe you can just come up and then we see whether it will happen or not. So I really wanted to come here. And so what happened is, okay, so let me introduce officially to you Peter Harris and his daughter Jo Swinney. And we will start our conversation. And I think it would be good to start with Peter, and he can tell you a little bit about his life's journey and why he devoted his whole life to the care of creation, and we can go from there.
I'll just start by explaining about the film and why we'd like you to see it, but it's also partly a bit of self-care on my part. So as Gisela explained, 3 years ago we were working with a Rocha in South Africa with our chief exec and his wife Susanna. And if it wasn't this church, I wouldn't talk to you like this, but we were heading back to the airport at the end of the trip, very happy because it looked as though we could partner with very poor communities in the Eastern Cape area where a nature reserve had been established, but none of the kids in the area were getting any education, and it was something that a Rocha could help with. And as we came to the bridge near Port Elizabeth, it was actually a climate change thing, I think. The bridge had been designed for the typical, what's called the Cape Doctor. It's strong southeasterly winds. But with climate change over the last 2 years, they've had very powerful northwesterly winds for which the bridge was not designed. So our vehicle came off the bridge, and my wife Miranda and my colleagues Chris and Susanna were killed, and I should not be here talking to you. We came at 80 foot off a bridge into a river. But one of South Africa's lifesavers, one of the few, was crossing the bridge in the other direction, heard the noise, did a U-turn and came down into the river, and the driver was conscious and opened the window of the passenger side and released my seatbelt, and they got me out approximately 30 seconds before I would have died, because I was head down in the river and unconscious, and my heart had stopped and all the rest. All of that to say, this book, when I came out of the coma and Joe and my other 3 kids had come down to be with me, one of the first things I said to her was, when it had finally got through to me that Miranda had not survived the accident, was, I really want your mother's writing to get out into the world, because Miranda had always been going to write this book. And I think she'd always said, well, when we retire and stop all this traveling and settle down, you know, and this film tells the story of how the book was found and how Joe, who's a very established author already and has 7 or 8 books to her name, which I, of course, highly recommend, as you'd expect from an unbiased father. Joe then took me at my word, and when we were clearing out the house, we discovered that actually Miranda had made a pretty good start on the book, more than we thought, in fact. Anyway, long story short, the book came out in USA 2 weeks ago, together with the publishers, who are a UK publisher, have decided to launch in the USA with this book and one by Bear Grylls and 2 or 3 others. I don't know if you know who Bear Grylls is, but he's a fellow Brit and a madman and an adventurer and a Christian. And so the book's come out here, and we have embarked on this tour, starting in Boston, then we were in Nashville this morning, and the last couple of days, because there's a strong a Rocha community of singers and songwriters down there trying to encourage the worship of the church to be more creation friendly. And then Joe's going to Chicago, and I'm heading up to Vancouver, and we'll end up there and all the rest of it. And it sounds as though our dear long-suffering colleague, would. Then that's what all this is about. Now you're trying to tell me something.
Just to say that we've had disasters with showing the film more than... I think there's only worked once, hasn't it? Yeah. So don't feel bad, honestly.
My famous occasion with this was I was at Wheaton College, which is quite a big Christian college. I don't know if you know it up there. And they have a very high-tech department as well. And it was about don't worry, it's all fine. 3,000 students were waiting for my presentation. And I talked to the tech people, and, it was kind of, it's all going to be fine. And so we got to the key moment where I had this great sort of hilarious video called The Front Fell Off, where an Australian senator is explaining that they've towed an oil tanker outside the environment so it wouldn't be damaged when it sank. And he's saying it's not in the environment, it's outside the environment. It's at sea, there's nothing there, just birds and sea and fish. Anyway, it's a great video and it sets the tone, and we were all set to go, and they plunged this auditorium of 2,000 students into darkness, and we sat in darkness for 3 minutes while nothing happened. It was just the kind of the killer start. So this is nothing. We're very at home with it. Anyway, I think what we'd better do in the British Blitz spirit is press on regardless, and go to your interview questions and go from there. Is that all right? Yeah. Thank you for your welcome. Thank you for the soup, and even more in a moment, thank you for the wine.
So at the Rabbit Room in Nashville, we watched quite a chunk of a commercial for bright pink shoes instead of watching the film. That's what came on.
Oh.
The shopping channel, yeah.
So we're bringing two things together here. St. Stephen's has a great passion for creation care. And of course, this family has a great passion for creation care. But we're also going to talk about hospitality and the publication of this book, The Place at the Table, Faith, Hope, and Hospitality. And so Miranda, who together with Peter founded Rocha, the way they did that is through hospitality. They started a center, a home, and opened it, and people came in and they built community. So there are really two conversations being brought together, and I think that's really important because they belong to each other. In a Christian mission, to not talk about hospitality is to forget that in the Judeo-Christian world, hospitality was fundamental and is fundamental in the Bible. It's not an option for Christians to be hospitable. It is our fundamental calling. Just like we're called to love, we're also to be hospitable. So there are two conversations converging here, and we'll sort of creatively walk in and out of the two different themes, all tied together under the roof of Rocha, this organization that they started and helped grow. And so I would like to start by asking Peter to tell a little bit of his story, why he devoted his life to start this organization and be involved in creation care.
As it passes me, I'll say there was an interview with Dad in a newspaper in Portugal that was titled "One Man's Wild Life."
It should have been wildlife, but anyway, it works better in Portuguese. If Miranda were here, I've heard her start evenings like this very often by saying, normally when a child is born, they say it's a boy or it's a girl, and in my case, they said it's a birder because I had binoculars around my neck. And I can't explain why. I grew up in the other Birmingham, UK, which is as far from any decent birding sites as you can imagine. My father was an engineer, nobody was anything ecological in my family, but I can't explain it. And when you talk to lots of naturalists around the world, they can't explain it either, they're just born with it. And I suppose in spiritual terms, the struggle was to figure out, so why did God hardwire me for the environment, for conservation? What's that about? And I read lots of Christian biographies where concert pianists never touched the keys again because they were called into ministry or whatever. And I just kind of felt that didn't figure with my understanding of a loving, creative God. It was that the challenge was to bring all of oneself into the reach of the loving God and see what that was about. And so when I was faced with a profound calling into the ministry after being a teacher for a while, I wanted to serve in a fairly deprived part of Britain, and I wanted to work in a church where there was outreach in that kind of a way. It was lodged in my mind, well, that's something I really am and I want to do, but what about that whole environmental side to me? And none of my environmental friends ever darkened the door of a church. And in church, I never heard anything that was relevant to what was obviously going to be the issue of our times, the collapse of the biosphere. And in fact, in the lifetime of a Rocha, which means the rock in Portuguese, we have lost half of life on earth, just in the lifetime of one small Christian non-profit. Half of life on earth. And we saw this coming, we were aware of it. You're probably anecdotally aware that you see fewer birds in your gardens now, the butterfly numbers are going, that all of these impacts are being felt. And in responding to that situation where there seemed to be a great gulf between, if you like, the conservation world, the environmental world, and the Christian world,
Rocha means the rock in Portuguese.
It works.
And
It works. Glory. We'll come back to it later. In response to that, we didn't want to set up conferences and write books, and also we weren't sure how a Christian approach would differ. Congratulations. You've earned your money, you've earned your soup, and a big glass of red. May I recommend the Pinot Noir? Anyway, we wanted to do something practical, and we felt we had a lot to learn. And because Christians were absent at the beginning of the contemporary conservation movement, we felt we had to go in pretty humbly. So long story short, we persuaded an Anglican mission society, against the better judgment of some, to allow us to go to Portugal to set up a field study centre and a bird observatory as Christian mission. And as Gisela said, over the 12 years we lived on that peninsula fighting for the protection of the wetlands along the south coast of Portugal and doing bird studies and moth studies and all the rest. Literally thousands of people came and lived with us and joined us. I think over the 10 years we were living in the first Rocha Centre, we reckon about 2,000 people lived with us during that time, most of whom would not have called themselves Christians, most of whom had never encountered Christian hospitality before. And I'll say one more thing and then I'll pass it back because you need to hear from Jo, and she grew up in all of this. Miranda, when we were trying to furnish this place, blew half of the budget on a table. And I was candidly cross at the time because we didn't have very much. But that table is still there. The place, which is now beautifully run by our Portuguese leaders, still gathers people from all over the world 35 years later. And it's been worth every penny. It's a big old chestnut table. And I cannot tell you the wonderful encounters, conversations, tears, laughter, joy, great meals that we've had round there, because it's a place of welcome. And when you begin your understanding of God with the community of creation and everybody within it, and it ends with the hope of the new creation, it's not, are you one of us or are you one of them? Are you one of us saved people or one of, it starts before that with the whole community of those who God loves. And it's for us to show God's personal welcome to people as they come and join us around that. So of the 5 commitments of a Rocha that we're Christian, we work in conservation. The third one is we work in and through community. And now we're in something like 30 countries or whatever, but the key thing about community is that we are always in a place belonging to it over a very long time. Great thrill for me to meet some people here who came across a Rocha in Kenya. The other night in Boston, there were people who had been involved with our project in Czech for a long time. And somebody, John Stott, I think, called us the Christian world's best kept secret. My colleague Avery Robson at the back here, who's just joined us from Texas a month or two ago, wonderful. Her job now is to try and help Rocha become a household name in the USA, because here we have struggled terribly, because I think much of the Christian church regards environmental things as perhaps dangerously aligned politically with stuff. It's got very political. And I can tell you, because I know many, many of them, that many secular conservation people almost regard Christians as the enemy because of the nonsense they hear from some Christians about Jesus coming back and it's all going to burn and we don't have to care. So that's essentially why, partly, we're with you on my 36th or 37th visit to the USA, through Joe's book, to try and find new friends for Rocha all around the country. And we're super grateful for your welcome here tonight.
Thank you so much, Peter. Before I ask another question, I think, Joe, would you like to add something to what Peter just said?
That was a pretty good answer, I think.
Okay, that was a pretty good answer. Peter, you have been doing this for quite a while now, and you've tried to reach out to many different communities. And we are here, St. Stephen's, but in the larger community here, we're trying to ask those sorts of questions. How can we grow in our awareness of creation care and sort of build community around this important concern and gather momentum and join in that movement? So do you have any wisdom for us?
I don't have any wisdom, but let me tell you about Simeon. So Simeon is the grandson of friends of mine, and Simeon has Down syndrome. And he needed some glasses the other day, and they took him to the opticians. And in Simeon's ideas, if you can come out of a shop with one thing, it's good, but if you can come out with 3 or 4, it's better. So he instantly had 4 lots of glasses on the end of his nose, like this. And it seems to me that our difficulties in understanding that at the heart of Christian belief is the calling in the Old Testament terms, right at the beginning. What does it mean to be human? It means to keep and care for God's world. That is to be human. How have we missed that and thought it's about me and my life only and not about the wider creation? Because we're wearing cultural glasses. And those of us who grew up in the Western tradition think, I don't know if you remember those Renaissance figures of the man, you know, with his arms outstretched. We think we're at the center of the story. Actually, we're in God's world. And so to answer your question, the way to begin to nurture the care of creation in oneself is to draw near to the character of our God, who is a God who made everything in his wisdom to give him glory, and to take off the cultural spectacles that say the Christian story is about my personal fulfillment. It isn't. It's about, as the Bible describes it, the foundation of God's loving creation, the trouble it got into when we rebelled against God, and the wonderful final hope of the redemption, as the Epistle to the Romans says, of all things. And it's a different story to the story the culture tells us. And the story of the environmental movement, the Economist said, is like the Christian story with no happy ending. You've got the beautiful garden, the usual culprits who are us, and then in the secular environmental narrative, we're all doomed. But actually, the Christian hope is God is not going to abandon the world he's made. He is with us in our attempts to care for it. So a Rocha never tells anybody anywhere what to do. I'm not from Alabama. I have no idea what you should do to express that love of God for all things. But I do think we're called to draw close in worship to the living God, to read the Bible for what it actually says, rather than looking at it through the lenses of personal fulfillment, or even worse, consumerism and individualism, which are the religions of our time, and to see that biblical story of how God's love for all things can be translated into what you are and what you do here. And we have seen over 40 years, God gives the local wisdom for the solutions. I'll tell one story and then I must stop. So let me face you with an intractable problem from Kenya. You'll know about this. The coastal forest used to be 4,000 miles long from Somalia in the north down to Mozambique in the south. And it is now down to 40 miles only that's left from those 4,000. And it seems an intractable problem. The local communities are hungry. There's no point going and saying, you've got the Sokoke scops owl in that forest, you've got Clark's weaver, you've got multiple species we don't even describe yet, you can't chop it down, because people are chopping it down, and this was the thing we discovered, they were trying to pay school fees. And so they were selling it as carvings to tourists and charcoal. And it looks like an intractable problem, doesn't it? It looks like you can either get your kids some schooling or you can have a forest, but you can't have both. But I think when you use that word wisdom, God has made the world to work. He's made it so that we flourish and the rest of creation flourishes. So long story short, basically what we did was we turned the forest into the banker for the school fees by charging everybody who goes into the forest to watch birds or to see elephants or to do what they do. All of that money now goes to pay the school fees of all the communities around the forest. So they've stopped the chopping down, they're replanting it, and we, with the help of some friends, are buying up great chunks a bit further north, and actually it's beginning to flourish. And you can now see 1 million acres around the world from space that Rocha has influenced in different countries, because Christians were there, and if they hadn't been there, they would have been destroyed and they'd be desert. And it is remarkable, and it is what God's people can do. But it's because we say there is a wisdom of God for the world, and it's never an either or. It's never people or the environment. It's got to be both. And in poor countries, environmental protection has sometimes impoverished people and driven people from their homes and done terrible things. And that's the equal and opposite problem. But as biblical Christians, we hold on to the belief you can create wealth without destroying the world. You can farm without destroying the world. You can do fisheries without destroying the world. God's wisdom is practical. It can be applied. And we've lost our nerve on that. We've followed the logic of the dollar and said it's either wealth or the environment. That is a terrible lie, and it's a scandal against the Creator. And what we're doing is just figuring these things out around the world through local communities who come up with their own solutions, and we're trying to resource them. And it's really exciting. And even last week, a new thing has started in Costa Rica, and it's just springing up all over the world. This wonderful understanding that it's our calling to care for creation. And it matters because where biodiversity is concentrated on the globe, which is roughly 2% of the planet's surface, nearly everywhere it's Christians who live there. And in the most surprising places, did you know that most of northeastern India is Presbyterian, and most of Papua New Guinea is evangelical, and the whole Cape Floral Kingdom in South Africa that we were visiting, there's just Christians everywhere. So if Christians get this vision, we're going to be the most strategically placed people on earth to do something about it. And I think it's a wonderful time to see this just spreading all over the world. But we do need some oxygen, so that's why we're out and about making friends for Rocha. Voilà, c'est tout.
That is wonderful. I hope just the few reflections that Peter has shared will give you an appetite for learning more about Rocha. There's so much to learn, and I love how each country and each ministry in each country is so different. Like the Rocha in Kenya does very different work from the work that's done in France. And in Germany, they now have a Rocha chapter, which I'm very pleased about. So please continue to explore this. And I think this is a good time to sort of shift the conversation a little bit, show the video, and then I would love for Jo to reflect a little bit on the process of picking up her mom's notes and writing this book and what that means to her. Yeah. That's very, very moving. I knew Miranda quite well. Actually, months before she passed away, she had written a note to me and Roy. She was so over the moon that we got engaged. I think she was praying for it for how many decades? Faithfully, absolutely. So it was really hard for a lot of us. Thank you for sharing this and giving us a glimpse into Miranda's life and the passion that she had for hospitality. I grew up in a winery, so my whole family was like that. My mother was like that. It was always about an open house and an open table and feeding people and gathering people. And the South is traditionally a place where that was like that. And I think we really have to reclaim the gift of hospitality and overcome all those inhibitions that we feel, that we are not good enough, that our house is not clean enough, and this journey is really important. So Joe, tell us a little bit more about your journey with the book and writing this book and your passions about hospitality.
First, I'd like to share a little memory of you, Gisela. So I met Gisela when I was 17, and when I was a student at university, I went over to visit you in Munich, and you were living in, I remember it as one quite small room, and you laid out this cloth on the floor because there didn't seem to be any furniture, and you made the most beautiful tea party for us. It was like the most magical tea party I think I've ever been to. And so you, in a tiny, tiny bare room, I was absolutely spoiled and made to feel incredibly special and cherished and welcome. And I won't ever forget it. And we've had different meals in different places over the years, and they've always been interesting and special. So I can confirm that you have your parents' genes in that, and I hope I do. I don't have my mum's gift for cleaning, but in other ways I hope I'm like her. So the book, my dad had given me this mandate to get Mum published, and I was thinking through how to do that from that point. And then we had this start, and Mum wrote most of the things she wrote were by hand. So if you can imagine how painful that was, it was just gruesome. But I started transcribing, and I was looking for, so the start of the book ended up being about 5,000 words. So this is a book of 60,000 to give you an idea. But she had written a lot else. So I just began to transcribe everything I could find that related to food or community or relationships and stories and things like that. And then I had an enormous amount of material, but it wasn't necessarily a book in that stage. So it was a question of trying to shape it. And then, as my dad said, I have written before, so I then set myself the task of kind of filling in the gaps and completing and shaping. So we did it. We got it there. It's quite unusual in the genre. There's all sorts of different kinds of writing. So I actually ended up thinking the best writing of Mum's was in her journals and in her letters, because stories are always what capture me anyway and engage me. So you can talk about the theory of hospitality, but my mum's life was the best illustration of that, and so colourful. So we've got big chunks of journals interspersing all the more normal kind of Christian non-fiction, and then some retelling of scriptural meals. Once you are looking for food in the Bible, it's absolutely everywhere, which I'm very happy about. And there's some prayers, and it's just a bit of a smorgasbord, to use a food analogy.
Both the terms community and hospitality are terms that they can be quite vacuous. We use those terms a lot, but we don't really know, what does that mean? What does community really mean? When I talk about community, I think a lot of how I grew up on a winery, and it was very similar to probably a Rocha in Portugal. People were coming and going all the time. We always had wine tastings. Of course, we were a farm, so there was a farming life. And when I then moved into another country, and I would talk about community, that they had a very different understanding of it. And so how do we sort of recover a more Christian understanding both of community and perhaps more so even in hospitality? And maybe that's where I land the question. Tell us a little bit about a biblical vision of hospitality that you really tap into. And she beautifully and imaginatively retells some of the biblical stories that have to do with food and hospitality. They have been so moving for me to read. So tell us a little bit about a biblical understanding of hospitality.
So first of all, I think that what has stopped a lot of us is some false ideas about hospitality, and I think it's got conflated with the idea of entertaining, which is a really nice thing, and some people are very good at it, but it's quite intimidating to produce a dinner party, to make your home acceptable, what you think is acceptable, and sometimes it's quite difficult to be on the receiving end of hospitality of that kind, because essentially the person is wanting you to be very impressed by their efforts and to say all the right things and then probably invite them back and put on a similar show. And that's not for everyone. It is delightful when done nicely, and it's a treat, but it's, I don't think, anything to do with biblical hospitality. To go to the heart of what I think biblical hospitality is simply living the character of God in us, because God is in the Trinity, is a community as God, first of all, and a community that invites us to join and to live at the heart of that relationship. God is hospitable, and in expressing his character to the world, that's hospitality. That's it in a nutshell. That's so close to what it means to be a Christian that if we're Christians, we are going to need to knuckle down and do it as we pray and as we read scripture and give financially and care for creation. This is all really just basic Christianity, I think. And it doesn't need to be difficult or complicated. It's literally making space. There's a brilliant, quite academic book called Making Space by a woman called Christine Pohl. But it's just making space. It's within yourself. It's eye contact. It's slowing down and giving someone your time. It's a cup of tea, if you're English. That will always improve the situation. Very simple. Very, very simple. And a joy to do, and a joy to give, and a joy to receive. Loneliness is at levels that are absolutely terrifying at the moment. We've all been isolated to different degrees, but we've all lived through this pandemic. And I don't sense that we've come rushing out and reconnected in the way we thought we might. I don't know how it is here, but people still seem a bit withdrawn from each other, and loneliness is more dangerous to us than heart disease or smoking. And just make eye contact with someone on public transport, and I guarantee you'll be in a really interesting and in-depth conversation in no time. Dad and I were both made people cry in Charlotte Airport with a very short layover. It's just there, and we just have to step into it, and God will do the rest.
Yes. So it's really a lifestyle of being welcoming and open, because God is welcoming and open and wants to draw us in and love us unconditionally. And but then there is this added layer of gathering people around the table, and that's something very, very special too. And a lot of the stories that you have looked at in the Bible and retold are about gathering people. So tell us a little bit more about why it is so important to gather around the table and share a meal, and what do we have to sort of learn to overcome so we are able to reclaim it?
Well, one of the things I really love about the Bible is it takes the earthiness of our lives very seriously. They are absolutely spiritual and absolutely vital. And Jesus did most of his ministry, it seems, around food. But as people, we really need to eat to stay alive, and we need to drink. And so this isn't surprising. It's not a big metaphor. It's true and real and important. And I've forgotten your question.
Tell us. Why is it so important? Of course, there are all these gestures of hospitality that we can give to each other all the time throughout the day. But then there is also the importance of really gathering people around the table and to share a meal. And why is that so important?
That's a really good question. I'm going to try and think of something significant to say. I think it's just because it's a nurturing thing. From when we're tiny babies, we are reliant on our mothers or caregivers to feed us, to stay alive. But yet food can be a source of real anxiety. In the UK at the moment, we're having what they're calling a cost of living crisis. And people are actually quite fearful about affording food. This is a widespread thing, and affording heat. And so to extend and to welcome in another and to share your provisions is quite a statement of trust in God for his provision to us for the next amount of food. And you can see this throughout so many Bible stories where people just faithfully, the stranger comes, the family comes, anyone, and they will be fed out of the provisions from the home. And there's something about eating with people who aren't your immediate nuclear family that is a really profound expression of the kingdom of God. And looking at how the Bible talks about heaven is very much in terms of feasting and eating and banquets. And I think that's because of those things. It's because that's a need that God knows that we have, and he knows that we're fearful about the hunger returning. And there'll be a point in time where all of that fear will be gone, and there'll be enough, and there won't be hoarding, and there won't be fear about the collapse of biodiversity and climate change that means you can't plant your crops because you don't know when the next rain is coming. God will just provide us with what we need into forever. And until then, we're making a statement of hope by sharing our food and gathering in people to feed them.
What I've loved about the Rocha family and having experienced the hospitality of your family is the vulnerability with which you have practiced hospitality. It wasn't a place where I felt like I couldn't be who I am with all the struggles that I have, but there was actually a place around the table where we shared not only a meal, but we shared our lives in very vulnerable ways, and how Miranda was always very open and honest about where she was at, and she had struggles, and she shared them, and that made me feel, oh wow, it's okay for me to have my struggles, and it's okay for me to share them, and it made me feel less lonely in the world by having a place to go to where you don't have to pretend. And so even just that we have to open our mouths to take in food and sort of face each other, it's like you can open your soul and be honest about who you are and be fed spiritually, knowing that we are loved and accepted right where we are. So I want to make sure we have enough time for us to mingle and for you to speak with Joe and Peter. And we have spread a little feast, and I want to thank everyone who has contributed to that. And so what I would like to do is I would like for Joe to read a little bit from her book. What I love about the book, it's a beautiful mosaic. It's like a community, because she co-wrote this book with Miranda. You have Miranda's voice and you have Joe's voice, but then you also have these beautiful retelling of biblical stories. It's a rich feast. You don't get bored. There are all these weavings that come together in this book, offering the gift of hospitality back to us and calling us to join into this important movement. So I'm wondering whether you could read the retelling of when Jesus cooked breakfast for his disciples, because I love that story, but the way you reimagined it really moved me deeply. So I thought perhaps you could read that story, and then we're going to open up the buffet, and we'll have wine and we'll have food and hopefully lots of meaningful conversations. So do you want me to hold the mic for you, Joe?
No, I can hold it. Just to say, there's I didn't add in any of the details. There's so many colourful details in the Gospels, so I just tried to get in them and follow how they might have looked. And so I would go back and have a look at this. So I've called it James's story. We were all in a rather strange frame of mind during those days after the crucifixion, when we'd got the Master back and then lost him again. That might explain why we spent that night out on the boat. We weren't sure who we were or what we were supposed to be doing, so we fell back into old habits, though it seemed like we'd forgotten how to catch fish. Hours we were out there and nothing. Peter was in a bad way still, beating himself up about bottling instead of going to the cross with Jesus. When we first saw Jesus after the resurrection, Peter was as overcome and happy as everyone else. But I noticed he hung back. There was such a crush, it wasn't like they could have had a heart-to-heart and sort it all out then. But I could tell Peter needed to know he was forgiven by Jesus, directly and with no room for doubt. When the night's darkness became the grey of early morning, we began to row wearily back to shore. It was completely still, and the only thing breaking the water was our oars. That's why we could hear the men shouting to us when we were still at least 100 yards off. "Morning, friends, no fish?" Perhaps he'd seen our dejected postures. "Put the net out the other side, see what happens." Thomas and Nathaniel hauled the net up into the boat, dripping cold water all over me, which I wasn't best pleased about. But then a second after they'd heaved it off and back into the lake, everything was chaos. They were nearly pulled in with the weight of a churn of frantic fish trying to escape the net. We were caught between belly laughing and trying to get a grip of the ropes to land the catch. And then John was shouting, "It's him! It's the Master!" And Simon was off, neck deep, and ploughing through the water like a man possessed, trying to reach him. He'd grabbed his cloak first, and I remember noticing how odd it looked puffed up with air around him before it became soaked and clingy. The rest of us carried on trying to pull in the net for a minute or two before we figured out we'd better just tow it behind us. I'll never know how it didn't break. Peter and I counted up how many fish there were just to stop us fighting about it later. I knew he'd exaggerate, and he knew I knew. Anyway, there were 153. We were all keen to get to Jesus, so we just fixed the net, fish and all, to the back of the boat and pulled it onto dry ground. Jesus had a fire going and fish already on the go, and he was almost hopping with the fun of having surprised us. We were a bit quiet, though. Speaking for myself, I felt a bit foolish for not having recognized his voice. And there was still the oddness of having watched him take what we all obviously thought was going to be his last breath just a short while earlier. I'm trying to say it felt a bit funny. There wasn't the easiness we'd had around him before. We sat around the fire getting warmed up and waiting for the fish to cook. The lack of food and sleep made me a bit blurry, and I kept wondering if Jesus would still be there after each blink of my heavy eyes. The way he'd been coming and going recently meant it was entirely possible he'd be gone in a puff. I couldn't bear it, so I kept staring and staring at him through the pale dawn light as the fish skins blackened and the smell grew painfully enticing. The sun finally appeared over the hilltop and made the lake's surface glint and sparkle. You could hear our stomachs growling by the time Jesus handed round the food. I've not had a better meal before or since. It was our normal gritty bread, a slab each serving as a plate for the hot, smoky fish. but the fear that had made it hard to swallow since the arrest in Gethsemane had gone. We'd added a few big tilapia we'd caught to the ones Jesus was cooking. It was a proper feast. Nathaniel and I admitted to each other afterwards that we wanted to ask him, "Who are you?" but didn't dare. We knew it was him. It was just he'd come back different, and we wanted to check and be sure. We'd seen him 3 times by then, it's true, but I don't know. He'd come out of that tomb changed. Peter was the first to finish, and he jumped up muttering something about going to check on the boat. We were all glad when the master followed him. We understood why he was beating himself up, but we could tell he'd been forgiven, and we hated seeing him all twisted up and miserable, not least because it made him a bit of a beast. A moment after the 2 of them set off along the beach, John was after them. He had a thing about not missing out, and he liked to think he was the favourite. The one Jesus loved, he called himself. I kid you not. Now and then it bothered us, but mostly we just gave him a hard time about it. We knew Jesus loved all of us. At least John had the decency to stay a couple of paces behind this time, though, so Peter could get things sorted out. Apparently, Jesus really pushed the question of whether Peter loved him. He asked 3 times. That must have hurt. Peter was the first of us to really see who Jesus was. And other than that one night, his loyalty hadn't wavered. But I think Jesus just wanted him to understand how strong that love was going to need to be. It wasn't said in so many words, but John said Jesus had basically hinted about the way he'd die, and it wasn't going to be of old age in his bed. At that point, Peter took a step back and nearly fell over John. It was pretty entertaining from where we were sitting. Peter said that he asked Jesus what was going to happen to John. Other than the fact that Jesus told him straight it was none of his business, the 2 of them don't agree on what else was said. Peter seems to think he implied John was going to live on until the second coming. And because he's such a loudmouth, that's the story that got passed around. But John's smart, and he said Jesus' exact words were, "If I want him to remain alive until I return, what's that to you?" He's right. Nothing there to say he's not going to die. I guess we'll see what happens anyway.
Thank you so much, Joe. I thought that was so imaginative and creative, giving us a new perspective on these stories that we've heard so much. So I thought it would be really important for us to have a time to mingle and to get to ask questions for Joe and Peter. I'm going to send Joe to the back where you can get, what was that? Oh yes, I'm going to say a blessing before I send her off. But she's going to go to the back over here if you would like to have a copy of her book or chat to her. And for the rest of us, I want us to be able to enjoy some wine. I hope there will also be some water for those who don't drink wine. And there will be food, and we can enjoy each other's company until 9 o'clock, and then we sort of have to send you home. So thank you all for coming. I really appreciate that. And thank you for joining into the conversation. And I am going to close this part of our evening with a prayer of blessing written by Miranda in a card to her dear friend Annie. I'll be praying so much for you and feeling very close to you. And may the Lord cause our paths to cross again ere long. Meanwhile, may he cause his face to shine upon you, his peace to reign in your heart, and his love to wrap you around always, keeping you in his ways, which are life. Amen. Thank you so much, Joe and Peter.